Hello again, friends, and welcome to Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell. The Will Muschamp midweek press conference took place today, and we're here to talk about with you on Gamecock Central Radio. Election Day, Tuesday. Wes, how you doing? Did you vote today?
I did. As we're recording this, I actually just got finished voting, so got that knocked out. No, I heard, about some long lines around the Midlands, but I got in and got out, man. What about you?
Yeah, I had a pretty short wait myself, so that was a pleasant surprise. I expected a long line. Didn't have one over on Rosewood Drive. I voted on Rosewood. How about you?
Yeah, I'm Meadowfield Elementary.
Okay.
So, not very far from my house at all, but yeah, it went very, very smooth, and got my vote in there. I don't. Hopefully, everybody else listening got out there and exercised their rights as well.
All right, Wes, Muschamp spoke for about 25 minutes today, and he talked about the Florida game that's coming up on Saturday. The Gamecocks winners of 3 in a row. South Carolina unbeaten with Jake Bentley as the starting quarterback, and the Gamecocks have clearly got momentum going into this noon kickoff in Gainesville on Saturday, Wes. And, Florida just got boat raced by Arkansas this past weekend, and they're dealing with some injuries coming into the South Carolina game. So it feels like Carolina's getting Florida at a good time, maybe.
Yeah, they are. Some linebackers out. Their quarterback, Luke Del Rio, obviously is out as well. This is a team that struggled last week. They're still double-digit favorites over South Carolina. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact the game is in the swamp, and South Carolina, this streak has all been at home. Obviously, that helps, especially with a young team. Young teams, I think, tend to play better at home. All teams probably do, at least to an extent, but young teams especially do. And, I don't know if Vegas is quite caught up or completely bought into, to Jake Bentley as a quarterback. I think if you look at how this sets up, this is probably another close football game for South Carolina. Now, at the same time, I think the big keys for South Carolina are going to be on the line of scrimmage on both sides. Florida has a big physical offensive line, and they have a very talented, very sound defensive front. So, South Carolina's offensive line and then South Carolina's front seven on the defensive side, both sides will be challenged in the running game. And I think that's where this game's going to be won or lost because, obviously, Florida, even before the injuries, Emerson, they've struggled at quarterback this year. So I think that's a situation where South Carolina slows down their running game, they can force some punts. But, I think their plan is probably going to be pretty clear. It'll be to come out and they'll probably simplify the passing game and try to do the power run game. And I think that's going to be very, very important.
Wes, clearly it's a big game for Florida. They're trying to win the SEC East. They are on top of the East standings right now. Playing at home will certainly make a big difference for them. They had a hard time at Arkansas, but Arkansas is a pretty good football team. One that's been ranked in the top 20 much of the year, and Arkansas took it to Florida on Saturday. So they'll look to capitalize on home field advantage. Noon kick could be an advantage for the Gamecocks. Typically, the home teams prefer to play afternoon or night games, so noon kick could be to South Carolina's advantage. Huge game in the SEC East, West. We're going to talk more about this. The Gamecocks are still in the hunt in the East as well.
Hey, yeah, that's just a strange thing to say or to hear, but it's true. And I get the impression, Emerson, that this fan base, talking about Florida, they're not completely sort of all on board with Jim McElwain right now. And they've turned on this guy. I don't want to characterize the entire fan base, but there's a portion that has turned on this guy with the quickness. And, I think you look at the atmosphere, like you said, a noon game, not necessarily a game that the fans are going to be crazy excited for, I don't think. So I think if South Carolina could start fast and keep the fans out of the game, that could set up well for South Carolina as well. So I think this one's interesting. Obviously, the sort of up top layer storyline you're going to hear with this game is pretty clear. Muschamp returning to his former team. Steve Spurrier has returned to Florida. You actually have guys, obviously, from South Carolina's team. Almost all of them, other than this class that came in this past year, were coached at one time by Steve Spurrier, who's going to be there and dressed in Florida gear. And then you have a percentage of the Florida team that was recruited and coached by Will Muschamp, obviously, who'll be coaching for South Carolina. That's the surface level storyline. To me, the deeper storyline is what type of a blow could South Carolina deliver to McElwain and his fan support and just because you don't play football is not in a vacuum. This is a division opponent, and anytime you can deliver a blow to a division opponent's program, that's an opportunity. And I think if Will Muschamp somehow goes into Florida, beats his old team in his first year with a freshman quarterback, the fan support for McElwain at Florida, injuries or not, is going to take a big dip, Emerson. I mean, this is a dangerous game for them, in my opinion, because especially, what's the one thing that Florida never really truly had under Muschamp? Well, they couldn't find that quarterback,
right?
And they struggled offensively, and McElwain was brought in to fix the offense, and other than a little section when they had Will Greer and he played pretty well, there's not been much pop to this offense. There hadn't been much pop to this offense this year. So
yep.
I know I'm getting ahead of myself with that, and part of a double-digit favorite. But the momentum of these two teams seems to be going in opposite directions, and South Carolina has nothing to lose. So if somehow they can continue this run they're on, then all of a sudden, I think they struck a major blow to Tennessee this past week or 2 weeks ago. I mean, it wasn't just a game like that. That was a major blow to Tennessee as a program. I think that exposed some of Tennessee's issues that were sort of bubbling underneath the surface. If they could do the same to Florida, I think that goes a long way for South Carolina. Just in the, not that they'll pass Florida, that's not what I'm saying, but it sort of knocks Florida down a notch, I think.
Yeah, and it would certainly serve notice to the SEC East that the Gamecocks are back in the championship discussion. So, Wes, I'm surprised to hear you say that the Florida fan base may be turning on McElwain a little bit. Florida won the East last year. They went to Atlanta. They played for the championship. And, Florida was ranked 10th or 11th in the country before they lost to Arkansas last weekend. They're still ranked in the top 20 in the country, and they got a chance to win the East consecutive years. But their starting quarterback, Del Rio, is out this weekend against South Carolina. They have not named a starting quarterback yet, and it feels like, I don't want to say the wheels are coming off for the Gators, but it certainly feels like these are uncertain times for them.
Yeah, and you know how it is. Every fan base has a portion, but a portion of fans that are against the current guy and doesn't think he can get the job done. But it just seems like that there's sort of a growing murmur, of people in Florida not too happy because, I think it's somewhat twofold. McElwain was brought in to fix the offense, and this is a Florida program that has been somewhat spoiled by Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer in that they expect to put up points, and when they don't, they get cranky. So, and you know what? The recruiting, at least on paper, has not been up to Florida's standard. I've been talking to some guys that are very familiar with that program, and the classes that McElwain has brought in on paper have not been on par, with what Muschamp was bringing in before him. So, they're sitting here. I think there's a part of that fan base worried. Okay, McElwain has not fixed the offense, and this defense is still made up of a ton of guys that Muschamp brought in. So they're seeing these guys start to get older and graduate out of the program and move on to the NFL, and wondering if the guys behind them are good enough and the guys coming in are going to be on the same level to continue this elite defense that they've had. So it almost feels like, the end of this year and into next year is a little bit of a crossroads for this Florida program because got off to a great start last year, didn't play well down the stretch. A lot of those problems were at quarterback, and even before the Luke Del Rio injury, that position has been an issue for them regardless of the injury. So I think they're a little bit uneasy, and they're probably a little bit nervous because Muschamp, to me, and Muschamp has handled it all week long with class. He said he's got, no animosity towards Florida. This is just another game. He said all the right things, but, I get the impression that, some of his players didn't admit it. Some of them did today. I think this is kind of important for the players. I think it would be pretty special for them to just go win one for their coach. Even if Muschamp doesn't ask them to or doesn't make it about him, I think that'd be a pretty special moment for these guys to go try to win one for their coach.
All right, Florida's dealing with injuries. They're going to have as many as 4 starters out for this game with South Carolina. Noon kick Saturday in the Swamp. It'll be on CBS. And this is Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell. We hope you'll download the Gamecock Central Radio app. We've got a free phone app that allows you to listen to the GCR podcast on your phone anywhere you receive cell phone service. It is a free app. It's available on the App Store and on Google Play. To subscribe to our podcast, search for Gamecock Central Radio. We're on iTunes, SoundCloud, and other popular services, or visit radio.GamecockCentral.com. Florida opened as a 15-point favorite, but it was announced that Del Rio was out, so the game went off the board, and when it reopened, West, it was down to about an 11-point spread. Florida favored by 11 over the Gamecocks. So we know Florida's got injuries. How healthy are the Gamecocks, West?
They're pretty darn healthy, especially for this time of the year, man. A.J. Turner, they got a little banged up. It's a knee sprain. It's day-to-day. They'll see how he is. Donnell Stanley, he's been out all year long. He's available, but still getting back to 100%. So, they've had some injuries, but not anything like Florida has. And, obviously some injury stuff is just luck or bad luck, but it's just, how the cookie crumbles, so to speak. But at the same time, I think you have to give a lot of credit to Jeff Dillman and his strength and conditioning staff, because this South Carolina team, to me, has looked well-conditioned all year long. They don't have a lot of depth, so they've got defensive guys playing deep into the game without any real rotation. And generally, over a course of time, the lack of injuries can also be a good sign of good conditioning and prep as far as having their bodies ready to take a beating. So, so far so good for South Carolina in the injury department.
A lot at stake for both teams, South Carolina and Florida on Saturday. The Gamecocks can get to 6 wins if they can beat the Gators. So Florida's got 2 SEC games remaining, and the Gamecocks playing their final SEC game Saturday in Gainesville. So, a lot still to be decided in the SEC East with just a few weeks left in the regular year.
Yeah, and, we'll track it all on Gamecock Central, of course. But, and South Carolina sort of they admitted that they talked about the East, but Muschamp's point to the team was, well, y'all know all the scenarios, right? And, I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, what's the first thing that has to happen in all those scenarios? And that's for South Carolina to beat Florida. So South Carolina's focus has just been on the game. And, I think even deeper than the fact that Muschamp coached some of these guys, I'm curious to see, Muschamp is such a detail-oriented coach. I'm curious to see how does that affect the game from a personnel standpoint, in that Muschamp is going to know these matchups. He's going to know the Florida team better than any other team South Carolina faces this year. So I'm curious to see if Muschamp's knowledge of the Florida team and their strengths and weaknesses is something that plays into South Carolina's favor as well.
All right, plenty more to come on South Carolina and Florida. More coverage for you here coming up on Gamecock Central. Wes Mitchell joining me to talk about this game today. Will Muschamp held his midweek press conference today on Election Day as we record on this Tuesday. Wes, thanks very much.
Thanks, Emerson. Have a good one, man. I'll talk to everybody soon.
All right, that's Wes Mitchell, and I'm Emerson Phillips, and this is Gamecock Central Radio. Thanks for joining us.